Chapter 5, Language, Key Issue 3, Continuation. Today's ICANN statements explain the concept of a lingua franca. Also, with different dialects, it's also referred to as a lingua franca. 2. Explain how Swahili, English, Mandarin, Arabic, and Spanish are all considered lingua francas. 3. Explain how English has gained global dominance by expansion diffusion. 4. Describe future trends of English and Mandarin as lingua francas. 5. Compare and contrast Creole and Pidgin languages as two languages fuse. And lastly, describe how colonial power still has dominance over spoken language. Alright, if you have time, you can look at this video. Alright, lingua francas or lingua francas. It is a language that's a commerce language, a language for business. English, as we've already learned, is the most widely spoken language, and in review, Mandarin has the most speakers of any language in the world. English is the first language to 328 million people, and it is spoken in over 58 countries in the new text. People in smaller countries learn English to participate in the global economy, as we learned with the Unit 1 with globalization, how we are all interconnected with the global economy. Other examples of lingua francas are Swahili in East Africa, Hindi in South Asia, India and Pakistan, Mandarin in China and Taiwan and other parts of Southeast Asia, Russian in the former Soviet Union and Russia today, and Eurasia, and Arabic in North Africa and Middle East Asia. Lingua franca, again, allows many students to participate in global education. So it goes beyond just a language for commerce. Lingua franca is seen here in both China and India within internet cafes to participate in education as well as the world economy. English on the internet. English is still the dominant language, but it's waning. Mandarin is most likely to replace English this year as the online language. More than half of the websites are written in English, and more than one half of websites, same slide here. More than half are written in English, but then more than one half of the websites are written in English, but English speakers make up only about a quarter of the internet users. So we can see this is one of the reasons why we see English waning, is that more websites have English as the language, and then only a quarter are English speakers. However, we can take into account for some second languages being English because of lingua francas. We've learned about why we see the global distribution of English with British colonization. When we look at some statistics here, English is roughly about the same number of English speakers as there are Mandarin speakers. Mandarin is made of logograms or ideograms, so characters, and it takes up less space. So within storage space on social media platforms or other media platforms, it requires less storage. So when we look at this, English message can be in English 140 symbols, whereas in Mandarin it could be half that. Pidgin languages are the fusing of two languages to form a simpler structure. So for a simple language, such as Spanglish, combining English speaker and a Spanish speaker and making a simpler language that combines the two languages. Same with another example, Franglish, and then we also have Danglish, and we also have, those are the primary three that you need to know. Creole language is taking a more complex language and combining it with an indigenous group of people. And the Creole that we see distributed in the United States to be in this Louisiana. because the indigenous population that's related to the West Indies resided in that area during colonial America, and they combined English with their native language, and it's kind of like a pidgin language, but it takes longer to evolve. It becomes more complex. So when we see the combining of an indigenous language and English, it was a pidgin language. Then over time, it gets a more complex structure and becomes a Creole language, a more spoken language. And Creole languages are a direct result of colonization. Here we look at the distribution of Creole languages with the parishes, governing bodies within Louisiana. Here's another pidgin language called the Gula Creolized language. It's spoken by African American communities in southeast United States, so in the areas of South Carolina, North Carolina, and northern parts of Georgia, Georgia, northern parts of Florida. It combines the first colonial languages of Elizabeth English with African dialects. And it's still spoken in regions of those states today, in enclaves. The expansion diffusion, English is spread through the internet, so contagious diffusion. We also see it with fusing with other languages, forming pidgin languages. Here's some examples of Spanglish down below. So we see it expanding for several reasons. One is because of the internet, contagious diffusion, and two is because of the pidgin languages forming. And with that being said, English is the most widely distributed lingua franca in the world. All right, we can look at the EU languages. And when we look at the EU languages, we can see that there is a compilation of different languages. All right, here's an example of pidgin languages of Spanglish. All right, Spanish and French in the U.S. and Canada. Spanish on a large scale is found mostly in the Southwest. That's where we see the distribution of Hispanic ethnicity in the Southwest. And we can kind of see that in the cultural landscape with radio stations and government documents and signage, where we have 35 million Spanish speakers documented. In reaction, we've seen 30 states that have laws that make English an official language. However, this has been ruled unconstitutional because, remember, the U.S. does not have an official language. It has a standard language. Here, as I already mentioned, here's the distribution of Spanish speakers. So, Hispanic ethnicity. And again, in these areas, some of you maybe traveled to them. You can see it in the cultural landscape with the toponyms and various proceedings by other institutions like government or retailers. The French Empire. The French had colonies in the following regions that are dark, and in these regions we see French as a dominant language or as a lingua franca, but also we see French pidgin languages. In Quebec, they've made French mandatory. Quebec also challenges a large number of immigrants from various regions that don't speak French. The language of preference when you're in that area of Canada, that southeast region of southeast Ontario region, province, the expectation is you speak French. All right, other regions where we see more lax laws are the Basque, up in the Pyrenees in northern Spain, and then Catalan in Catalonia, where the city of Barcelona is in Spain. You can see coefficient languages. As always, take time to reflect on what you've just learned. All right, should English be the U.S. official language? You decide. We don't have time. We don't have time. All right, continuing on to key issue 4. Key issue 4 is why do languages survive or perish? The I can statements explain what is meant by an isolated language, a linguist fragmentation, and an extinct language. 2. Describe how language can cause a conflict within a state or country. 3. Explain why the number of Celtic speakers has declined and how the languages are being preserved. And lastly, identify and explain how several countries peacefully embrace more than one language. Let's talk about language diversity and difficulties. Looking at Belgium, there are the Wallons and the Flemish. The southern Belgians speak French. They're called the Wallons. They live in an area known as Wallonia. And that region is known as the more poorer or agrarian region historically. We can see that today in many ways, that socioeconomically it's the poor region, whereas in the north there are the Flemings. They speak Flemish. They live in the area called the Flanders. There's pressure from the Flemish speakers for division of two independent countries, and as I already mentioned, because the Flemish have higher socioeconomic status, they have better capital in terms of their land, and they control more of the cultural affairs, the public health, construction, urban development. All right. So that tells us the language conflict in Belgium between the Wallons and the Flemish. All right, again, this just shows you what we just talked about. All right, and Wallonia is one of the poorest regions, while Flanders is one of the wealthiest. All right, here's a diagram that shows. Note that in the capital of Brussels, you'll see both languages, but also the capital of Brussels is found in the region that is where we see the Flemish language spoken in the area of Flanders. We look at bilingual autonomy. French is one of Canada's 2 official languages, so French and English. French is in an enclave in the Quebec region in southeast Ontario. French is about 1/4 of the country's population. Again, it's clustered in Quebec. There's been confrontation and there's been separatist movements, but as of right now, they're still united under one governing body of Canada. Here we can see the distribution and the concentration of French speakers in Quebec. Moving to Switzerland, this is a very peaceful coexisting languages, so it's a multilingual state. They have no centralized government, so all 4 languages are represented in the government. Local authorities hold most of the power, so local authorities of the regions are going to use the dominant language for government communication, signage, laws, etc. The languages are German, French, Italian, and Romansh. Here we can see this multilingual state. They've institutionalized cultural diversity, and Switzerland has been very successful with this model. All right, here's another look. All right, let's talk about Nigeria. Nigeria has over 529 languages. The largest languages are Hausa, Igbo, and the Yoruba. Here we have in the Caucasus region or Central Asia, you have conflicting religions, ethnicities, and languages that shape a sharp divide between Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and then parts of what would be the Russian Federation, Chechnya, Dagestan. And then we have also isolated languages. An isolated language would be Basque, found in the Pyrenees Mountains, northern part of Spain, southwestern region of France. They have been isolated with their language for a period that extends as long as the statehood of Spain. And then we also have this Icelandic language. And there's been little change because of isolation from the Germanic languages that have shaped modern English. Here's an example of Basque language in the Northern Pyrenees. We have the extinctions of languages. When we talk about extinctions of languages, we are basically talking about a language that once was used by a lot of people in daily activities but is no longer in use. The extinction may follow the process of a language becomes vulnerable to extinct when it is used to restrict certain domains, like being allowed to speak in the home or in public places. And it's a vulnerable language because it's not taught in schools. And we can see this with several Native American languages in the U.S. with the cultural assimilation of the Native Americans in the late 1800s led to the removal of languages in reservation schools, native languages in schools. Here we can see languages on a global scale that have died out or are in endangerment. One of the interesting things we can see is that when we look at this chart, we can see more developed countries are going to have less dying out languages. Okay, and then here is a dot matrix map that shows critically endangered to severely endangered. Again, we can see that it's found in areas that have low arithmetic density where there's more isolation of people. Here's a distribution of extinct languages. Ethnographers estimate that 367 languages have become extinct since the 1950s, a rate of about 6 per year at current rates. Languages have gone extinct, so the languages in red. In the country of Taiwan, because of the lingua franca, which is Mandarin, as well as the other spoken language to the west, Minnan. Preserving languages, we see with the Celtic language. With the Celtic language, you have it originated in Ireland. There were two forms. There was of the Celtic language. You had the Irish Gaelic and the Scottish Gaelic. The Irish is one of the two official languages in the Republic of Ireland. The Scottish Gaelic is spoken, a form of Celtic language that's found in Scotland, and you have about 1% of the people speak Scottish Gaelic. When we look at both these languages, we can see that the languages are used in public communication. They can be used in schools. So the revival can happen with mass media or implementation in schools. Here's an example of how with Gaelic in Ireland, it is used within government signage. So we can see that in 1996, the Irish language is allowed to be broadcasted on TV, and then in 2005, Irish road signs were erected in Ireland. Other reviving languages is the Miami, which is the Miami tribe in Oklahoma. So Native American languages. We have Hmong languages that are being revived in areas where we have Enclaves of Hmongs are high arithmetic density enclaves like California, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and North Carolina. Here's an example of how you revive a language. It's taught to the younger children within a school, can be in an informal school setting or a formal school setting. Here's the Maori, which is in New Zealand. Other languages in other languages that are in your book are the Welsh, which is being revived in Wales, Britain, which is in Cornwall, which is also in the British Isles, and Cornish, which is in 2008, it was among several the Cornish languages were spoken by a large number of people in Cornwall, which is in the southwest region of England. Take time to reflect. And that will conclude Unit 3A. Make sure, again, you start your test review for 3A. You review all your notes and your reading guides.